Thank you for joining us today. I'm Johnny Anderson. I'm joined today by Jeff Nyquist from drnyquist.blog, Trevor Loudon from trevorloudon.com and keywiki.org, and Jimmy from Brooklyn. Trevor, we'll start with you. How are you? Happy New Year.
I'm doing good, thanks. I'm very chipper and living in a very exciting world right now. And so, I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys think of it all.
Oh, yes. A lot to discuss today. Jimmy, how are you?
Getting by. Looking forward to this conversation today. I want to hear what you guys got to say.
And we're looking forward to what you got to say, too. Happy New Year, by the way, gentlemen. This is our first convening of the new year. You guys weren't here last week, but it was just me and Jeff. And speaking of that, Jeff, how are you?
I'm surviving.
Yes, that's good. That's good. Do we want to start with the Trump Greenland talk? Yeah, we were discussing that a little bit before we started. Do we think it's real or do we think it's fake?
Yeah, well, my theory, for what it's worth, is that it is a provocation, designed to get control over Greenland and maybe force a compromise, but also to further sour relations with NATO to the point, if it gets very aggressive, that NATO might just say to hell with America and just walk out, just expel America and go their own way. I think there are people in the Trump administration absolutely who want to end America's commitment to NATO. And I think they are pushing Trump to do this and be aggressive about it in the hope that it leads to the dissolution of the alliance.
I think that that's a possibility. I mean, I'm not picking one single avenue here, but I personally think, given what he's done in the past, and this is what Jimmy's brought up before, getting the Europeans to push for 5% of their GDP into defense for NATO instead of the 2% or less. And now what's Trump done? He says, well, we're just going to take Greenland. We need it. So we're going to take that whether you want us to or not. And what's that prompted the Europeans to do? The Germans are sending troops. The French are sending troops. The UK are talking about sending troops. The Danes are sending even more today, more than a dog sled from what Trump said before. So I think maybe it's a ploy to get the Europeans to actually reinforce it. To that point, there's no point to take Greenland if you're the United States. There's no point to do it. We have an agreement with Denmark, who is over Greenland. It's a NATO cooperative joint defense pact. So why do we even need to take it? All we have to do is just reinforce what's already there. If we said we're going to send troops there under NATO command, well, then no one would have a problem with that, right? Jeff, what do you think?
Trump is being ambiguous in this entire first year. You saw his throwing Zelensky out of the White House with that horrible meeting at the end of February, on February 29th. You saw him delaying on sanctions on Russia. And then when he put sanctions on Russia, Lukoil and Rosneft, the two large oil companies, that was only half of Russia's oil exports. And they could shift, with a little bit of disruption at first, they could shift all their oil over to the other companies and export it then. So it really didn't stop Russia's oil export. Of course, the reason the administration gave was that they didn't want to disrupt the global market economy with the sudden cutoff of Russian oil. But that was October that they imposed the sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, and they froze their assets. That had to hurt. But it wasn't something significant enough to make the Russians cry uncle. And it's just like the arrest of Maduro. It's ambiguous. It's positive in the sense that a communist dictator is in an American jail, but then there was no regime change in Venezuela. Delcy Rodriguez and her brother are still there. El Pulpo, the octopus, Mr. Kabila is still in charge of the Interior Ministry. They're still working with the Russians and Chinese. And more important, Vladimir Putin says he's not leaving Venezuela. And he sent his biggest submarine down there to the Caribbean, one of his biggest warships. Might be in tonnage the biggest warship the Russians have, huh?
30,000-ton submarine is not a small submarine.
That's the Bismarck, I think, was 32,000 tons. So it's a monster ship, but I think this is the devil is in the details, and we're going to know if. And then Iran. Here's another one. We've had just about a week of severe unrest in Iran. The president has said that help is on the way. He's encouraging these people to overthrow the government. But so far, nothing concrete has been done by the U.S. or its allies. We don't even have an aircraft carrier in the Gulf at the moment to help those poor people. And now we know, as of this morning, 12,500 Iranian civilians are dead. You've maybe seen the the videos of them mocking these dead bodies of these poor people that got mowed down. They're stacking the bodies up like cordwood. I mean, this is a massacre. I mean, the U.S. has intervened, has talked about intervening in mass, genocidal events in the past. You talk about, the mea culpa that President Clinton gave about not intervening in the genocide in Rwanda during the 1990s. What are we going to do about this? How many more people are going to die? Are we obligated to do something? Well, if the president of the United States says help is on the way and he's encouraging them to do this, there's two ways to interpret it. He wants the enemies of the regime to come out in the open so they can all be slaughtered, or he's going to help them, one or the other. Which is it? Well, again, it's ambiguous, right?
Yeah, well, see, when the Israelis were hammering the Iranian military, it was Trump that called them off.
Good point.
This may have all happened earlier or less bloodily had the Israelis been allowed to do what they needed to do.
Yeah, and have you heard that Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are against any kind of intervention? Do any of you know why?
I've not. No, I don't know why. I mean, you would think of all people, you'd think the Saudis would be all for, intervening.
Except that if I'm the Iranian government, my first message to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states is that we'll unleash all of our missiles against your oil infrastructure if you say boo, or if Egypt brings that Pahlavi guy over there to be the king. So I think there's been a threat made against the Arab oil infrastructure in the Gulf. And
then they would pressure Trump, and then they in turn would pressure Trump. So
right, that's a good point.
Pressure all different directions here. It's one of those things. No matter what you do, there's a problem.
Yeah, this is why this is the thing about nuclear weapons. And one of the arguments that people have made is that Trump is being ambiguous about Ukraine, and he is maybe doing a feint towards Greenland to make the U.S. look like it's at odds with Europe so that Russia won't start a nuclear action against Ukraine or Europe. That's one interpretation. There's a lot of educated guesses we could make, but always and forever, we're in this, the fear of nuclear war is really, I think, distorting policy. Or you could take the point of Richard M. Weaver, who wrote Ideas Have Consequences, that philosophically, the Western mind is disintegrated and obsessive. That Trump is a typical exemplar of the Western, how the West is degenerated. And he's intellectually scattered. He's not focused. He can have stratagem, but he can't have a strategy. And that's why everything's ambiguous. He does one thing here, he does one thing there. This thing contradicts that thing. Which enemy is he against? Who's he for? The most interesting thing I found is that Trump has said that any nation now that trades with Iran is going to get a 25% tariff.
Yes.
Is he serious? Did you see how angry the Chinese were about that?
Yes, of course. The Chinese don't need 25% tariffs right now.
It's crushing. It'd crush them. But is he serious? Would he really do that? Because the Chinese have said, we're not going to stop supporting. We support stability in Iran. That's what the Chinese are saying. Yeah. So what is it going to be?
Then you have the idea that some people think that we could pull Russia out of China's arms. So he's trying to stop Russia in one hand. At the other hand, he doesn't want to give up the idea of pulling them away. So it's a confusion.
This is still State Department policy and Defense Department or Department of War policy now, that it was the fault of the last administration. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at this, but it's just so ridiculous to anybody that knows. But it was the fault of the last administration that drove Russia and China together. So it's by Pete Hegseth saying that. To me, that signals, well, then our goal, what he's not saying is, well, our goal is we need to separate Russia from China.
Yeah, we need to reverse that. But see, this is, what's happening is more consistent with Yavanism and Duginism than anything else. This idea that Yavin's idea that we have three spheres of influence in the world. America gets the Western Hemisphere, which is Greenland, which is Venezuela, which is trying to get the Russians out of there. But Russia gets Europe, right? And China gets the Far East. And he's making a lot of moves that will be consistent with that but some, like seizing Russian warships on the high sea, Russian flagged oil tankers on the high seas. It's very hard to get a consistent read on any of this. But I still think Yavanism, Duginism is the core philosophy of many people around Trump.
Yeah.
Now they're
all starting.
Yeah, go ahead, Jimmy.
They're all starting from the premise that we won the Cold War and we defeated communism. So anything after that stupid premise, they believe, can't go right. And,
that goes to the philosophical deficit and intellectual deficit we've got going on.
I heard Roger Stone the other day on his radio show on WABC Radio. Roger Stone was praising Nixon, how Nixon did the SALT Treaty with Russia, and then he opened China and ended the war in Vietnam. And then Roger Stone said nobody could have foreseen that China, 30 years or whatever later, would be a threat. China's a communist country.
How could
they not have seen it? You mean that crazy Mao Zedong wasn't really a mass murdering communist?
But
China had no electricity. They were primitive. So at that point they were, but it's still communist. Why build them? You build them stronger. It would make them more of a threat.
Yeah,
so
now instead of one monster,
communism.
Yeah, instead of one monster to deal with now, which was the former Soviet Union, now we've got a two-headed monster to deal with.
And they engineered a bioweapon that caused a pandemic that caused us how many trillions of dollars in debt?
And we go digging back through the archives, myself and a couple other guys digging back through the archives. We're the ones that worked in collaboration with the Chinese under Fauci to give them the ability to do that in the first place.
How wonderful!
Oh yes, yeah, that was a great idea.
Yeah, see this the example of collaborating with the Chinese communists is contagious. Oh, Nixon did it. Kissinger did it. It must be all right. We'll make a deal with them. Next thing you know, we're all dying of some weird disease they concocted from some bat in Central Asia.
And they're still doing it. They're still working on bat viruses. I think they're trying to cut it out now, the funding. I mean, imagine a crazy doctor. A person goes to the doctor says you have lung cancer. And then the doctor says, we're going to give you brain cancer to counter the lung cancer. So they built up China to counter Russia that they built up prior. I mean, it's so bizarre.
And I have a clip here of Fauci. I mean, this is in the intro, but I'll just play it here for reference. And he almost says it.
We had a collaboration with some Chinese scientists.
Chinese communists? Scientists. He almost said Chinese communists. He said it.
Oh, my gosh. Yep. These people, I mean, look, there's a moral idiocy here. That is really, it's your regular somebody who's born an imbecile can be a very sweet person, can be a very useful person. These are moral idiots. They're highly dangerous. You shouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. They should be institutionalized. Well, they are in the wrong way. We've made them the head of everything, right? How did that happen?
Well, it's the old saying, the inmates are running the asylum. That's what's happened here.
For sure.
Yeah, that's right.
So all right, let's shift up here a little bit. Venezuela, right? So Maduro has pled not guilty. The Attorney General, Mr. Alex Saab of Venezuela, has said that it's illegal. Let me get the exact quote here. It's illegal to keep. What did he say? He says that Maduro. Here we go. Maduro, quote, cannot be prosecuted because he has immunity for his position as president. Now, Jeff, you'd made mention of this last week. They're still trying to claim. And what's her name? Delcy Rodriguez. They're still trying to claim that Maduro is the president of Venezuela. And they've brought Maduro's son out now. And he's now holding rallies in Caracas, pro-Maduro rallies for his father in Caracas. So, I mean, they're still claiming he's the...
They can't show legitimate receipts that he was elected. And from my understanding, is 70% of the Venezuelan people voted against him. And they just basically overrode the election and made him president anyway. So, I think the Organization of American States does not recognize him as a legitimate president. Although I think most of the countries in the world do recognize him as a legitimate president. There's something like 60 countries that don't. And a lot of them are Latin American countries. There's been some elections in Latin America that move things to the right, Petro's going to lose in Colombia. You had the election in Chile. You had an election in Bolivia. You had an election in, Ecuador?
Yeah. Argentina. Milei. Argentina.
Yeah, in Argentina, Milei got reelected. I mean, South America is having a right-wing reaction to Venezuela. to Lula. You'd had a bunch some years ago, a bunch of left wingers taking power. They're getting knocked out now. And I think the tide is starting to turn, at least within Latin America, the other way. So at least that's a positive sign. But it's not a positive sign when Trump sends a State Department delegation last Saturday to negotiate with Delcy Rodriguez in Caracas. Meanwhile, they were arresting the deputy head of military intelligence and other officials. They were having to purge because they thought these guys might be CIA agents because, we have in our custody the former head of Venezuelan military intelligence, Mr. El Pollo Carvalho, who was captured in Spain, handed over to us, and apparently he has provided a list of U.S. People in Congress. I think they're senators who are supposedly paid by Maduro's regime. Have you seen the list?
I have not seen the list, but I'm going to run it down now. That's good.
Yeah, I haven't seen the list. I was talked to someone this morning who said they have seen it. But that there's at least one Republican on the list, but most of them are Democrats.
Go figure. Yeah.
Go figure. Right. And of course, this is a good thing. But why is this being hidden? My understanding is that El Pollo, the chicken, he's going to be testifying through the middle of February. So hopefully this is going to all be very clear from public testimony. And of course, a lot of the case against Maduro is based on his testimony. And of course, this guy was moving narco terror money into Spain and Italy to support communist groups in Spain and Italy, which is, of course, is what they're all about doing, communists and terrorists.
Yeah, but Italy, I mean, you and I were discussing that a little bit yesterday. And I mean, Italy's just crawling.
It's ground zero for communist and Russian activity in Europe, really. Yeah. They had the largest communist party of all the NATO countries during the Cold War.
Yeah. And the Spanish, they've got a big target on their back. They're really, really trying to go after the Spanish. The Russians, I will say, and I said this to you before, I've said it before, when it comes to going after Russian organized crime groups, I get better cooperation out of the Spanish, out of their federal prosecutor's office. They don't care when it comes to going after the Russians. They will go after them, and they don't care. They are not afraid at all.
No. Although the government, Prime Minister, president of the government, they call him, Sanchez, is actually threatened by El Pollo's testimony because a lot of this testimony has to do with Venezuela helping the Socialist Party in Spain. And one of the most implicated people, my understanding from a source I have, is that a former prime minister of Spain is implicated. A former president of the government is implicated. So we'll see. There's going to be revelations, I think, about Spain, Italy, about infiltration of the United States, because El Pollo there was also in charge of that. And I think the proof is going to be in the pudding. But of course, Maduro's bribery of U.S. senators this should be front page New York Times news. I don't know, I want to see where this is coming from. Is this being held back? Is this a leak? Where are we getting this from?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, to the point about the communist groups in Italy and in Spain using Venezuela. I mean, this is what the Soviets used to do. They would always get a group in a satellite country to do their bidding. So they would get all the networks and everything set up in their satellite countries, which back in Shana's time, it was Czechoslovakia. They would use them to set up everything. And they've done the same thing here. And they did with the terrorist training camps. The Soviets set those up. The Russians set those up in Africa using DGI instructors out of Cuba. So they have a history of coordinating these networks like this for infiltration and subversion.
One rumor I heard was that the Cuban bodyguards of Maduro were ordered to execute him if he was about to fall into American hands. And I don't know if this is true. I imagine if it is, it'll come out and we'll hear it. But apparently, maybe Maduro and his wife were actually resisting being put into that secure room because they would have been executed in there if the Americans were going to get into it. I mean, what do you think of that?
My thought is, that's entirely possible. My thought is that they couldn't execute him and his wife because they couldn't see him.
They couldn't see him. Well, I should remind everyone about declassified documents that came out in Chile about Allende's death, right? Salvador Allende, the communist president of Chile, supposedly committed suicide in, 1971, when the army was closing in on him. But actually it came out that his Cuban military advisor executed him, so that he could not fall into the hands of the army and give testimony against other people and explain what was really going on. So I think Maduro knows things. By the way, Switzerland seized 110 metric tons of gold in Maduro's Swiss account that had been taken from the Central Bank of Venezuela's gold reserve.
That's interesting.
They're holding it. Yeah.
I wonder, does Senora Rodriguez, does she have a little bit in some Swiss bank accounts? Maybe, but I understand most of her wealth is in Dubai. Her and her brother's wealth. And yes, of course.
Cabello is in Dubai. I think the Russians have a better position in Dubai.
Yeah.
You know, when the Soviets did the collapsed look, and in Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega lost the election, and he said, we're going to rule from below. And then he got elected, I guess, president for life. But the communists also said they want to run for office and win. They're going to rule. And if they lose an election, they're going to step down. In other words, they're going to be less threatening. So you have Democratic Socialists of America doesn't sound as threatening as a communist party. But at some point, with the communist strength growing in every single country, they won't need to step down at some point. The only reason they may be stepping down now, they're not strong enough to take over each country. But the more they're in, the longer they're in, and the longer time they have to grow the masses that support them, they'll be able to kill the opposition because they're doing research. They know who their threat to their power is. And at some point around the whole globe, each country could be taken over pretty much at the same time by gaining strength, building strength, because if they lose elections and step down, it doesn't look as threatening to people. Like right now, the conservative side is winning elections. But what happens when the left refuses to step down and just starts killing all the opposition? That would be in the works, because that's how the enemy works.
Right. And they can't step down once they have committed enough crimes, because they will themselves be strung up. And this is the problem in Iran. And I just wonder where the next days will be telling what Trump does with Iran. It's going to be very telling, because the people are done with that regime. You've got 80 million people who are just done with it. And I don't think there's no reason why it should survive. And it's very strategic. If Iran falls, 90% of Iran's oil goes to China. China will not be able to make up that oil with Russia, especially, the 3 Russian oil tankers were hit with drones, not Russian tankers. They were actually Greek registered tankers, but they were working for Russia. They had just loaded up with oil in an oil terminal there in the Black Sea, and they were headed out, and they got hit by Ukrainian drones. And Russia's oil refineries are taking a beating, and Russian oil storage areas are being destroyed by drones. The Russians literally cannot defend their oil infrastructure against attack.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. So if we've basically we're in the process, supposedly, I think this is kind of crazy, because if we go back in there in Venezuela and we get back into the oil business, they're just going to seize it again if we don't get rid of the communist government. So there's that aspect. They'll just do what they did before. But if we've cut the Chinese off from Venezuelan oil, because that was one of their sources, if we cut them off from Iranian oil, then the Saudis aren't going to be able to satisfy that. The Russians aren't going to be able to satisfy that. But then what will that do? That will then flood the market with cheap oil. You've already got Russian oil right now that's around $34 a barrel. And that is going to, if it goes to 20, they can't survive that. There's no way. If world oil prices go into a glut, then that's disastrous for Russia.
Yeah.
So regardless if their infrastructure survives or not, if the oil prices dip below 20, if Russian oil prices go below 20, that's it.
Well, you see what's happening with silver and gold. There's some kind of a counterattack from Russia and China against the currencies, against the euro and against the dollar.
As you're pointing out, all the possible threats to Russia, China, and Iran, as those threats seem to be happening, the enemy that's supported by those countries in this country is getting more bold and stronger and more violent. So the internal enemy we have in our country, American people, they work with the outside enemies. So as we're working to weaken the outside enemies are working in our country to weaken us.
I'm sorry. You probably just saw the look on my face, Jeff. Silver's $92 an ounce.
Yeah, I was told it was headed to 90. Yeah, I heard that it had gone up. I think, what I'm told is it's going to go shoot all the way up to 200 because of what China has done. And China has done this on purpose. This is China's doing. And I think we're going to see more. And they're attempting to break our financial system and cause unrest here. But of course, historically, every attempt to just attack the dollar by the Russians and Chinese, every little experiment, I should say, because they've only conducted little experiments, each time it's backfired. So they're really acting out of either they know what they're doing finally and they can do it, or they're going to destroy their own economies in the process. I wonder what Trevor thinks about Iran and what we should do there. Iran and Venezuela, what do you think, Trevor, about what we should do? I mean, it's really unpopular on the right to intervene right now, and on the left. Everybody seems to be against it, and Congress is even trying to pass things to prevent Trump from doing things.
A few members, Don Bacon and a couple of others, but I'm generally for it. I'm generally trying to encourage the Israelis to do something and to generally to just stick it to the mullahs once and for all. This is the closest chance we've had to topple them. And this, to me, would prove Trump's bona fides as someone who's actually on the side of freedom. He's talking about it, but is he just trying to lure people out into the open? He had a chance to do this a few months ago with the bombing of the nuclear facilities, called the people off, just as he did with Hamas. He stopped Israel taking Hamas out, and now Hamas is almost built up to full strength. So if he's serious, the least you could say, if he's serious about getting the Russians and the Chinese out of Latin America, he should be serious about ending the Iranian regime. He would have enough intelligence given to him to know how deeply embedded the Iranians are in Latin America. So really to get the Iranians and the Russians out of China, it would make sense to depose the mullahs, I believe.
And what about grabbing the at least the part of Venezuela that has the oil? Do you think that would be a wise move?
I think it probably would be, to be honest. I'll be called a neocon from here to for saying that. But
are you Lindsey Graham having lunch? Is that what's going on here?
Look, I have never been opposed to regime change. I think it's always been in America's interest and America's moral and strategic duty to get rid of evil threats to America where possible. And I think the public would accept it. And I think it would scare the bejeebers out of all the dictators of Latin America. And get them rethinking their stance. It would be a big snub, huge snub. Do you think it would help Trump
in the midterms?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Well, it depends if it was well executed. Mm-hmm. If it became a quagmire and a disaster, Americans were dying. Well, it wouldn't. But if it was I think the recent decapitation of Venezuela, I think that will certainly help Trump in the midterms. Depending on what goes on between now and then.
If we take over the oil fields in Venezuela, we already have this thing, no war for oil. So if we take over the oil fields, I think immediately they have to make everybody know the money's being put into a bank account for the future government of Venezuela. And maybe we should start immediately spending that money in Venezuela, rebuilding, to let the world, to make it harder to build a no war for oil type thing, thinking we're going to steal the oil and keep the money.
But you actually have to have regime change for that.
Yes,
the communists are still in place.
The communist government is still in charge, and everyone's still there. All the military brass, they're all still there. Delcy Rodriguez and everyone in the cabinet, they're all still there. The ruling party is still in power, so there's not been any change. They've still got political prisoners.
To me, the real thing here, go into, help the Iranians, put huge pressure on the Venezuelans, and go hard on Cuba, very hard on Cuba.
Yes, that's another subject I want to talk about is Cuba. So I'm glad you brought that up. So we've stopped the Venezuelan oil shipments to Cuba, but now Mexico's trying to take up the slack. And now Trump is saying, yeah, Cuba, you're failing. You're on the rocks. So Cuba, Colombia are the next two on the list, I think.
And then maybe Brazil.
I don't know about Brazil. They're trying to make Lula look like a friend to Trump, which I think is ridiculous. But no, Cuba. I think Cuba is important. I don't see like how do you go about that? What do you do? I mean, you've got a communist government that's been entrenched in there. They brought Raul Castro back out. I don't know if you knew that, Trevor.
No.
But they brought him back out. Did they make him part of the defense? Is it the Defense Council?
He was leading the Defense Council, which is in a communist country is the highest authoritative body.
Yeah,
it's the real leadership. All the military and KGB types.
Well, the Trump has a pattern of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory when it comes to our enemies. And this, I don't want to see more of that. I want to see some real regime change. I think if Trump put the pressure on Venezuela, he could get regime change. I don't want just going to seize the oil and letting the communists stay in power is enough. I think that the regime is better.
The only question is whether Trump would destroy his own presidency because of the narratives that are going on the right and on the left in this country. I am not seeing people, they have so hammered the so-called neocon, whatever that is. I've never been a neocon in my political thinking, but I agree with you, Trevor. I agree that we need to down our enemies when we got the chance. This is a golden opportunity to take down Iran and Venezuela and to put China in a position of being dependent on oil supplies that we control are in our alliance, right? There is this oil. By the way, there's this pattern. Notice the Zelensky government strategy is to go after the Russian oil, which is a huge industry in Russia. And also now they're going after the exported oil. At the same time, Trump has boarded 3 of these tankers, 3 Russian tankers, and Trump is blockading the Venezuelan oil. And there's this unrest in Iran. Is it a coincidence? This is an interesting question. There's a pattern here. It's all about oil. You could say it's all about oil. Well, is this just an accident that it's happening this way? That's an important question to ask too.
The big thing we don't know is what is we see things that we approve of, a few things that concern us, but what we can't understand is what is the overall guiding philosophy here, or is there not one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Speaking of Dugin and this whole Yarvin everything, right? Dugin, I follow his Twitter. He's on Twitter. Twitter's actually banned in Russia, but he uses it through a VPN through other things. So he does have an account. It's not verified. It's not allowed to be verified, but he does put small snippets out. He put this out yesterday. He says Budanov, which is the new guy that is taking over as the what's his name? The new guy that Zelensky just appointed to take over. So
he was the head of military intelligence in Ukraine.
Yes. So he says Budanov, British MI6, and the American CIA killed his daughter. They killed Dasha. I think her name was Daria, is what we understand.
Daria. Yeah.
They killed Daria to intimidate all Russians, as they openly claim now. The effect was quite the opposite. They have awakened deep people of Russia. It is irreversible. Yeah,
we keep hearing this from the Russians, and we keep hearing on their TV talk of using nuclear weapons. There's bigger mobilizations. This is a question. Is Russia now putting the pedal to the metal, and will it blow up their engine, so to speak? Because there is growing dissatisfaction. You remember this, Johnny, that about, 8 months ago, the Putin's bodyguard quadrupled. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's an indication that he's afraid from within his own state that as he pushes this war harder and harder, somebody's going to try to off, and maybe somebody in the military, because he's got, it's like a giant parade of armed people around him.
Yeah, and not only that, but he has also gotten rid of a lot of people. So a lot of military brass, a lot of top guys, they're not there anymore, and he's made moves. Yeah, he's made moves since the Ukraine invasion, one of which was Nikolai Patrushev. He was moved from the deputy head of the Security Council, which is one of the highest positions, moved over. He put him over as the head of maritime operations. Yeah, shipbuilding. Yeah. And you see what that's done to their submarine fleet since that happened.
Well, it's funny. They do seem to need ships.
Submarine production. I mean, Jimmy, they're putting out a new submarine, I think, every few months now. Patrushev was former head of the FSB, which was, he was a successor to Putin, and then was put in as deputy head of the Security Council when Putin became president of Russia the second time. And then Putin moved him over. And we didn't know it until I heard about it, and he had done it 6 months prior. And Patrushev, and when they did it moved him over to shipbuilding, and when the order was given out to the oblast, I don't know what you call them, but we would call them like governors, the ones that are over.
Yeah, they call them governors. Yeah.
Yeah. When the order was put out to the governors to mobilize their economies for a wartime effort, Patrushev made that announcement. It wasn't Putin. It was Patrushev that did it.
Yeah. You have these guys like Patrushev and who are like troubleshooters. They'll go into these special areas. And the big problem in Russian military production and areas is corruption, stealing, embezzling. And they've had a lot of arrests within their defense organizations and their military industry of people embezzling. And so they're basically correcting the problems with the system. They are progressively doing it. And that's not good news for Europe.
I think we were talking about the Dugin and the Yarvin, strategy and philosophy of the three spheres of influence and, your hemisphere kind of thing. So Russia would be over Europe in this case. But look at what the Ukrainians are doing and look at what the Europeans are doing. The Europeans are in the process of rearming now. So do you think that this is going to go down without a fight? I don't think so.
No, because nobody's going to give up. And that goes to Karl Marx and Lenin, who basically said that the capitalists will not go down without a fight. They will, in the end, fight. And, Lenin and Stalin and Marx all believed in Clausewitz. And Clausewitz was the guy that said, you can't have a victory without a very bloody encounter, a battle that really settles it, just like is happening in Iran. Battle. A real fight where people really give it their all to stop you. And there's something in human nature that even though it's desperate and we're outnumbered, a good example is Churchill in Britain standing up to the Nazis. Even though you're outnumbered and it looks hopeless, if you could just hold on until all the resources of the West can be brought together, you can affect it. I mean, look at the way Latin America is turning to the right because of the example of what's happened in Venezuela and Brazil. Yeah, I mean, there's hope there.
Zelensky is a great example of it too. The Ukrainians, they are fighting when nobody expected them to fight to the degree that they have.
They may be the ones that have saved everybody by fighting.
Well, I believe we would have already been in World War III by now and probably have lost it had it not been for the Ukrainians.
It's possible because Europe was not ready.
The world doesn't know about the Ukrainian genocide. Most of the world doesn't know. Just as the Jews will never surrender to Nazis anywhere or to any major threat, the Ukrainians know the danger of Russia and the communists from their history. If the American people knew that, they'd understand a little better.
It's a good
why
point.
Ukraine fights like that and why we have to help Ukraine. Because even if we don't help Ukraine, they're going to fight. They're going to keep fighting, just like we would.
The Jews and the Ukrainians are the most genocided people in recent history, really.
Well, that's right. Americans aren't urgent about this because Americans don't think they're in danger. But the Ukrainians know that they're all dead and decimated if Russia wins this. They're going to be slaughtered. They're going to be chased out of their homes. There's no peaceful solution to this if you're an Ukrainian.
Yeah.
Right. They'll fight to the end, just like we would, those of us on this conference call here. Even if the rest of America might not have that type of feeling, we know we're under a huge threat, even though we never lived under anything like the Ukrainians did. So they are fighting for the free world. It's like the whole fate of the whole planet is dependent now on Ukraine.
Yeah,
and there's people here who don't support Ukraine.
No, well, that's the whole point is that the Russians have turned that back around. They've used a public disinformation campaign to turn public opinion against the Ukrainians. So see, if you just and you hear this in the Russian media, or at least, it's difficult to kind of get some of that information through because Russian media is blocked here. But I hear it on Russian media all the time when I watch like their top headlines and stuff. And they say, look, to the Ukrainians, if you just give in to peace, everything will be fine. Right? If you just come back in, if you just come home, everything's going to be okay. All will be forgiven. As you've got drones and missiles that are being slammed into the ground in Kiev, they're talking about peace.
Imagine the slaughter there would be if the Russians took all of Ukraine.
Oh yeah, and I don't know if you saw this or not, but did you see that they dropped another hypersonic on Lviv this time?
No.
Yes, just the other day. And we're talking 50 miles from the Polish border, 50 kilometers from the Polish border. So you would have thought that they would have dropped it on Kiev. They did not. They dropped it on Lviv.
Yeah, the reason for hitting Lviv is it's the closest to Europe, and it's formerly part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and formerly part of Poland in the interwar years. And they're hitting it, and it's a message to these other countries that we've got these missiles, and they could have nuclear warheads, and they could be hitting you. And it's not affecting Europe. It's having the opposite effect. This whole business, both of the Russians threatening everybody, you'd think that they had learned, they knew better. You did not see these kind of overt threats from Stalin. He was much too sly, knowing that you don't threaten, you act. You do what you're going to do, but you don't threaten. That's a problem with Trump too. Threatening is not a good tactic politically, because it helps your enemy get ready and strengthens their resolve in some ways. You just do against them. You just act. That's why the arrest of Maduro was so striking and had such a great effect. Of course, Trump had threatened Maduro, but nobody conceived this kind of thing could happen to him.
When you make a threat and then you carry it through.
You have to carry it through, yes. You do.
Yeah, and that strengthens then the next time you threaten.
Yes, it does. Well, and that's why this threat to Iran is so important, that Trump follows through on it.
Yeah, he must. But just on Venezuela, we note there's reports coming out that Tulsi Gabbard was not part of the planning of this operation.
That's interesting. Yeah. And that goes to what Mr. Wang told me last month when I interviewed him, that his sources in China say that these group of agents that China has around President Trump have not managed to succeed in persuading him to their ideas, and that it's Marco Rubio who has instead persuaded the president to his ideas. And Marco Rubio, if you've read his book, his more recent book, is rather, he's somewhat quiet, but he seems to be a very hardworking type of senator who knows a great deal. And if you heard him threaten China recently, where he said to the Chinese, you move on the Taiwan and the Philippines, we will react. We don't want to have to pay attention to you right now, but we will. I don't know if you saw that threat on China. Very interesting coming from him. And I wonder to what extent Marco Rubio and his people and his people that support his ideas haven't gotten the upper hand in the administration. That is a possibility.
I certainly hope that is the case.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, he's of Cuban extraction. And of course, that Cuba has suffered, among the communist countries, has suffered something terrible since 1959. A very terrible, you could say occupation. Dreadful. The average height of Cubans now is 6 inches shorter than it was under the Batista regime. That's how their diet has gone down under the communists.
That's like North Korea. It's like North Korea, the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah, Venezuela, they've got the same problem. Is you've got growth problems. You and I were discussing that, Jeff. That's irreversible. You can't fix that later in life.
It's damage. Yeah.
Yeah, and this also goes to it also goes to cognitive ability. Your development of your cognitive ability when you're a certain age. You're growing up. You can't repair that. There's no way to rectify that.
No.
That's what the enemy's doing here with our children. The COVID lockdowns, the cell phones with the sex, pushing marijuana, the transgender stuff. They're working on our children too as an enemy operation.
Yeah, they say that the average young man who smokes marijuana is 4 inches shorter than the average young man who doesn't.
Wow,
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, I had a friend who was in Spain. He's a little short guy, a little short Irishman. He said when he was in Spain, he noticed that all the guys, I think this was a few years ago, in their 60s were all his height, because they'd all been young kids in the Spanish Civil War, and they hadn't got fed properly, so they're all 5'3" and 5'4".
Yeah,
and they say that when Chinese are very small people, but when they move to America and have American diets, they grow to the same size as Americans do.
Yeah, that happened with the Europeans too. I heard that about the Italians.
Yeah,
came in at a certain size, and the American food, and
Yeah, and then, this goes to the Ukraine famine, and I've talked to Ukrainians. This is part of the feeling of the Ukrainians. You got people my age in Ukraine, their grandparents, in some cases their parents, if they were older, suffered in the Ukraine famine. Do you know that it has, I didn't know this, it affects the next 2 generations can be affected. If you're starved severely, close to death, and you have children later, it actually affects them. I did not even know that.
No, I didn't know.
And so it has generational effects. And I've talked to Ukrainians who have literally discussing what happened to their grandparents, their great uncles, and other people. Literally have broken down in tears while they've been describing it. I mean, this is a deep emotional wound for Ukrainians. This is one of the reasons why they're fighting Moscow so hard.
Yeah, that's right. And very few Americans really know that.
Yeah, just like the Israelis.
They should have a special kinship with the Jewish people.
I think they do.
They have that in common. They were victims. Yeah, well, you've got to hear more about it.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. I'm not disagreeing, but it's very difficult to get that message across to the conservative-minded people in the West because we've all been beaten over the head with the fact that there's nothing but a bunch of Nazis.
Yeah.
So you can't, what are you supposed to do? You try to talk to the average conservative minded person out there about this, and they say, oh, well, look, we're just giving all of our stuff over to Ukraine, and we're giving all of our money, and they're just a bunch of corrupt neo-Nazis. What are we doing? This is the response I get. This is what I'm dealing with. This is what I have to fight back against.
Yeah.
Well, see, again, this goes back to the basic premise that I push is that people don't understand or know anything about communism, communist history. Anybody who opposes or is in the way of any communist or communist movement are called fascist. They took over Cuba under that guise. In Africa, they took over fighting apartheid, so that was against racism. So when they took over Nicaragua, every country, they're fighting fascism. So now you have Antifa, which is communist, calling us fascist. And when the World Trade Center was blown up, that Ward Churchill, the professor, was celebrating the killing of all those little Nazis. At the Trade Center. And Ward Churchill wrote for that publication put out by, who was that defector again?
COVID. You're talking about AG.
What was it? Yeah, Philip AG, Covert Action Information Bulletin. That guy that called those people who died at the Trade Center attack from Ben Laden, the guy that was cheering that, referred to them as all those little Nazis. So the communists call anybody in their way Nazi and fascist because the world, as history, fascism and Nazism is bad. So if anybody you hate, you call them a fascist or a Nazi. And this is what they did. When the Nazis were bombing England, the Communist Party of England was trying to get the English government to basically surrender and have peace. Mm. So the communists in every country work against the countries they're in. And this is a worldwide thing. This is another thing that our side doesn't understand. Like the problem with Iran, the problem with all these countries, it's the networking and the unity of the communist movement, and there's no counter unity against it.
Well,
maybe
Trump is trying to build one. Maybe he's working for the Russians. I don't know. I don't know I got theories. There's evidence in both ways. This is the big question of our time, as far as I'm concerned.
This is the most important time, I think, maybe in world history. I mean, people could debate it, of course, but it's crucial now. Everything going on simultaneously. Yeah.
Yes, we are coming up on time, gentlemen. So we're going to have to spend the final 5 or 10 minutes here on our final thoughts. Jimmy, you want to give your final thoughts first?
We need a major wake-up call, as I've been saying. More people have to see the documentary, The Soviet Story, to learn about the Soviets' genocide in Ukraine and the partnership between the Nazis and the Soviets. The Soviet story, it's very important for people to see it. It should be shown all over the world, have translations in every language. We need a major wake-up call. We need to have people speaking up at the UN. Wherever there's a public forum, we got to bring these type of things up because this is very crucial. Right now, the communists lose elections. They may step down, but they're still there. So if the good side, the conservative side, wins an election in the country, we cheer that. But you got to remember the enemy is still there working in that country to topple it. At some point, they'll be strong enough to topple it. They won't have to step down. So the enemy's working. It's like time's on their side because nobody sees this as a race to ultimate victory. But the communists view it all the time as like a race or a movement for ultimate victory.
If people want to follow your interviews, Jimmy, how can they do it?
Well, I do a lot. These interviews all get put together. It's dynamic independence, obviously, but then they also get on jrnyquist.blog, and haven't done any lately, but on rumble.com with Lee, and I'm Jimmy from Brooklyn. I have my own channel there. Haven't done any lately, but hopefully I'll get back to it as soon as I clear up some matters.
Trevor, final thoughts.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking a little bit recently about George Washington's farewell address, and because there's a big argument on the right, of course, that we should not intervene, we should not have alliances, we should go it alone, we shouldn't get involved in foreign entanglements, as though we're living in 1776. And George Washington, in his farewell address, said something along the lines of, in the times of emergency, we should make alliances and be very glad of it. Well, I would posit that since 1917, we've been living in a century-long emergency, and that alliances are very necessary. We're not living in 1776, where it was just one prince fighting another prince over territory or religion. We're living in a time where the ideologies, the Marxism, Leninism, Eurasianism, fascism are on the march. And every free country must be working with every other free country to combat this. So this is the time for alliances. This is not the time for non-intervention. This is not the time for isolationism. This is a time for a vigorous, aggressive foreign policy and military policy against our enemies. This is our duty to end the evil empire in our time, and we have the opportunity to do this.
Let me add 1 second here. If you're building, God forbid your building's on fire, people join in, people in the building, people in the neighborhood, everybody runs over with buckets, with hoses, try to put out the fire. You can't do it alone. We need the unity. The enemy has unity in every country, so we need a counter unity. We need the good guys, the free people, to be unified. But they also have to be aware that we have a common global enemy. So we got to make a global awareness and then global networking to counter it. You're right, Trevor. You expressed it very well.
Thank you.
Yes, you did. Trevor, if people want to follow your work and support you, how can they do it?
Yeah, trevorloudon.com. That's where you can get my books. You can see my daily blog, etc. And, of course, keywiki.org, which has got well over 180,000 files of communists, socialists, etc., including Vladimir Putin, the big file on his communism. He's about as Christian as Liberace,
Very well. Jeff, final thoughts.
Yeah, well, we have the two biggest oil countries that were brought into Russia's orbit, Moscow's orbit, Iran in 1979 and Venezuela in 1998 with the election of Maduro. I mean, not Maduro, Chavez. We have a chance to flip those over. And that would give us a decisive situation, especially with Russia's oil industry being devastated by Ukrainian drones. That would put an end to the mobilization of Russia and China. They would not be able to think in terms of a world war. It would save us. And maybe somebody's got the brains in Washington that has thought this through, or because Trump thinks as a businessman, he's been convinced of this by Marco Rubio. I think it's possible, and it's very good news if it's true, if they can execute a policy and they can get public support. So let's hope that this is the case.
Yes, I have to agree. If people want to support your work, Jeff, and follow you, how can they do it?
jrnyquist.blog and my page on Amazon for my books.
It's been a great conversation, gentlemen. I look forward to speaking to all of you again next week. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to all the listeners. God bless everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you. See you guys.